Okay, on August 9th, 2014, Michael Brown was shot by Officer Darren Wilson on the streets of Ferguson, Missouri. Now, the details of the situation are still unclear for many of us. But what we do know, however, is that the unique circumstances of the shooting caused an uptick in protests unseen in America for a very long time. In case you didn't know, Michael Brown was black and Officer Darren Wilson was white.
The decision to not indict Officer Wilson took place over our school's Thanksgiving break. Tarek and I lived together on the same hall as proctors, and when we returned from the break, the decision was a constant topic of conversation. It turns out that we had many similar views surrounding the event. But within our discussions, there were two main questions that we were trying to get at. The first was, how did the shooting of a young black male by a white police officer spark this wave of protests? And second, what can America do to change the way we think about race? Now, we want to take this moment to introduce ourselves. My name is Matthew Morrow. I'm from New York City. I'm 17 years old. And specifically in New York, I'm from the Upper East and Upper West Sides. And for those who don't know the demographics of New York City, those are two neighborhoods that are primarily white and affluent. And I've been lucky enough to go to private and independent schools for my entire life.
My name is Tarek Deida. I'm from rural North Carolina. I'm from a predominantly African-American community, unlike Matt. And I've gone to primarily public schools and charter schools my entire life until Deerfield. Deerfield's my first private school experience.
Now, despite these differences in our backgrounds, we have very similar views when it comes to race in America.
And that's what we're going to talk to you about today, race in America, specifically black and white, and the small incidents that have gotten us to where we are today. Now, we understand that for some of us, this issue is it's touchy, it's uncomfortable, but we feel that our differing experiences can offer a unique perspective on this situation.
So in order to kind of get at the heart of the problem, we're kind of begin with a history of race in America, and we're going to actually start with before the United States was a country. And during that time period, the color of your skin wasn't the thing that really mattered. The thing that determined your social status was owning land. And the people that worked this land were indentured servants. These people were the most popular form of labor. Indentured servants were people from Europe and Africa who had to serve terms of 5 to 7 years working land, upon which completing that contract, they would get their own piece of land and earn their freedom. And both blacks and whites were indentured servants. There were many instances of white landowners who had black and white indentured servants, and there were also instances, although fewer, of black landowners who had both black and white indentured servants. And slaves eventually became the most popular form of labor because economically it made sense. There's no cheaper form of labor than free labor, and America tried to hold on to this as long as possible.
Now, let's fast forward a little bit to the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence, as most of us know, states that all men are equal. But when our founding fathers came together to form the Constitution, they said that slaves would only be counted as 3/5 of a person. Now, considering that blacks at this time, or the majority of blacks at this time, were slaves, this rule essentially implied that blacks were to be only counted as 3/5 human, insinuating that blacks were barely human at all. Now, Frederick Douglass, he speaks on this issue a little bit in his The Meaning of 4th of July for the Negro speech, in which Douglass basically questions the values and the ideals outlined in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution because he never saw those values extended toward his people during his lifetime.
Now, racial tensions boiled over in the 1860s when America went to war with itself over the issue of slavery and race. Quote, both Northerners and Southerners recognized slavery as the immediate cause of the Civil War. That is from David Goldfield's book, America Aflame, How the Civil War Created a Nation. Now, the Civil War is America finally confronting slavery and race head on. The only issue with that was that African Americans didn't have a large say in how that was going to play out because a majority of the war was being fought by white soldiers. And ultimately, the future of their social status wasn't in their hands. It was in the hands of white males. In the Reconstruction era that followed the Civil War, it was a failure. While it guaranteed blacks' rights on paper, it didn't guarantee those true freedoms in everyday life. And America still hadn't confronted the entirety of the race issue. The segregation and the Jim Crow laws that resulted from the Reconstruction era were tried to be solved in the Civil Rights era in the 1960s.
Now, the Civil Rights era was more successful, and the Civil Rights Movement altogether was more successful for African Americans because it not only furthered their rights on paper, but it also sparked consciousness within the black community. Now, we believe that during the Civil Rights era, and even after the Civil Rights era, black people or African American people, they gained more confidence. They began to understand they had the power to change their social situation. They didn't have to undergo They didn't have to undergo these injustices, and they had a voice. And we believe they used the media to release that voice, to let people know about their situation, specifically the music industry and the movie industry. Now, let's look at the music industry for a little bit. As we all know, African Americans have had a huge influence on the music industry, from rock and roll to jazz to today, hip hop. Now, hip hop began in the Bronx during the late 1970s. It was a way for young African Americans living in poverty mainly to express their story, to tell others of their situation. And hip hop is interpreted now as sort of like a voice of the people, a voice for the people who feel like they're oppressed, people who feel like others in the nation are ignorant of their situation. And some really prominent hip hop groups were NWA, Public Enemy, and even today we have the Black Hippie group. And these groups basically, like I said before, they relay their situation through their songs. Their songs act as a sort of outcry for help. They want people to understand where they're coming from, and they want their messages to inspire us to help them.
And movies had the same sort of idea behind it. Movies such as Juice, Do the Right Thing, Boys in the Hood. These movies were African Americans who were trying to share their story with the public. And the media and the public misinterpreted these cries for help, and that has led to many of the stereotypes that we have today. While we were doing research for this topic, we felt that stereotypes were something that we needed to talk about, because stereotypes are something that plays a large role in how we view black and white today in America. And in our research, we came upon two Wikipedia articles. The first was about white American stereotypes. The second was about African American stereotypes. The page about white American stereotypes, when printed out, was only 2 pages long, a very short article by Wikipedia standards. On the other hand, the page about African American stereotypes was 12 pages long, and at the bottom included links to even more stereotypes.
As Matt pointed out, the black stereotypes list was huge. So we won't be able to cover them all, but we chose a few that we felt are very prevalent within our society today. First being, we're more athletic. We all love chicken, watermelon, and Kool-Aid. We all aspire to be rappers and basketball players. We speak with ebonics. We're criminals. We live in urban areas or ghettos. All black women are angry. We're all people that can dance. All young black men are gang members or gang affiliated. We only like rap music and R&B.
On the other hand, there wasn't a very long list for white stereotypes, but what we could find kind of boiled down to these 5 things. First, we're all rich. We can't dance or jump. We're oblivious to real world problems, and as a result, we have our own white people problems. And then you have groups such as WASPs, or white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, and rednecks, who allegedly give white Americans a bad reputation. Now, media perpetuation of these stereotypes has turned black and white race into the us versus them narrative. That's something that we feel is at the heart of racial issues in America, and something that needs to change.
Now I'm going to take a minute to talk about our perspectives. As a young black male from rural North Carolina, as I said earlier, I never felt uncomfortable about my race because, once again, I grew up in a predominantly African-American community. My mother never shied away from talking about race at the dinner table. It was never a taboo in my household. I would say it wasn't until I really came to boarding school, or I went away and I was thrust into all-white settings, all-white environments, that I really began to notice that my being black made me different, and not always in a good way. It was being in a predominantly white setting was the first time I really encountered a lot of racial jokes, a lot of comments, stereotypical comments made about my race. And yes, this frustrated me, but now when I look back on it, I feel like I was more disappointed than frustrated. I was disappointed that even our generation, the progressive generation, the generation that's supposed to be very accepting, very tolerable of other people, we're the ones still making these insensitive comments. We're the ones who still aren't racially aware and honestly socially aware. And I understand that a lot of us are ignorant, and a lot of us, some of us come from all white backgrounds, all black backgrounds. We never encounter others who don't look like us, who don't share similar backgrounds as one another. But I feel like using ignorance as an excuse is no longer acceptable, because people have been using ignorance as an excuse for generations. It's time that we make the conscious effort to become racially and socially aware, because believe it or not, one day you'll have to leave your predominantly white world, predominantly black world, and you have to encounter others who don't look like you, who don't come from the same background as you, and you have to know how to conduct yourself around these people. So I urge everyone, that goes from myself, Matt, we all need to become more racially and socially aware.
Now, growing up, race was always sort of a taboo subject in both my households. My parents never sat me down and told me, Matthew, you're white, you're living in America, things are going to be easier for you. That race is a taboo subject is another thing that we feel is at the heart of problems in America. We, and when I say we, I speak on behalf of my generation of white American males, we choose to look the other way when it comes to race. That's something that we feel can't happen. Now, a majority of white America thought that they had done their job when President Obama was elected in 2008. There was even a Forbes article from 2009 that declared, quote, racism was dead, unquote, as a result of President Obama being elected. Yet we still have incidences like those that happened in Ferguson, Missouri, and those that happened in Staten Island with Eric Gardner. As a 17-year-old white male living in modern America, frankly, I'm appalled by the lack of true equality that we have here today.
We need to stop looking at race as a black issue or a white issue and recognize that it's an American issue. We have to work together to resolve this issue and to resolve this problem that's been within our society for such a long period of time.
There needs to be a shift in the American conscience. There needs to be a shift in the mentality with which we view race.
We need to stop giving in to this media portrayal of race as an us versus them narrative, and we need to stop sensationalizing things like this.
For white families in particular, race can no longer be a subject that is off limits, a subject that is taboo. It can no longer be the elephant in the room that we all acknowledge is there, but when we are confronted by it, we decide to turn our back and look away.
We need to confront race head on. Martin Luther King Jr., Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, and other great civil rights leaders, they marched, they protested, they worked to get us to where we are today. But what a lot of people fail to recognize is it wasn't just black leaders who helped get us to the point we are today. It was from the efforts of both black and white people that we were able to live the way we do today. And progress needs to be made.
Race in America isn't a black issue. Race in America isn't a white issue. It's an American issue. The time for change has come. We need to work together to resolve this problem. Let's work together, America. Let's keep talking about race. Thank you.
Thank you.